It is within the company's ethos, devs before rev. We obsess about the end user. We obsess about the developers that are going to use these technologies. We'll make their life easier and revenue will happen.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Good. How about you, Erum? It seems like there's been some really crazy biotech news in the last few days.
Yeah, there always is. There's stuff that we discover, and then there's stuff that comes into the mainstream. This news came out that scientists use food dye found in Doritos to make see-through mice.
Wait, what?
Yeah. So it's this crazy thing where it's a Stanford University that did this experiment where they used this chemical found in yellow dye number 5, which is used in Doritos. And this chemical is called tartrazine. And what they did was just rub it on the skin of mice, and the skin became opaque.
How did they even think of this?
We have to read the full report. It's also in Science, so we'll share that in the show notes. But they rubbed it on the mice. They rubbed it on the stomachs and the scalp and the hind legs of the mice, and they were able to see through. And what they were able to see were the branching blood vessels, some muscle fibers, contractions of the gut. I'm listening to this. I was washing dishes. I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, first of all, we got to talk about this in the pod. Second of all, where are we going with this? I mean, there's obviously an advantage to medicine because this sounds like non-invasive ways of looking into how our body operates. I'm sure that it's very helpful, but yeah, how did they think of it? It was someone eating Doritos when they're handling mice, and then all of a sudden, yeah, which a lot of science happens accidentally. So I thought that was very interesting. We'll definitely keep an eye out for any developments on this front. But wow, just a chemical that was discovered that we use every day that a lot of us consume. We're fans of Doritos. I know you are, I am. And that chemical that we ingest can be used for medical purposes. Making skin see-through is wow.
Yeah, so title of the article is much more boring. The title of the article is Achieving Optical Transparency in Live Animals with Absorbing Molecules. And there is one picture that shows a mouse's belly, and you can see through it before, but you can really see the red vascularization after. So what it makes me wonder is, are we going to start seeing people doing this to their stomachs or their arms and then posting pictures on social media about what their body looks like when you look through? I know a lot of these food dyes have been banned because of they're not healthy for people. So I don't know. I'd like to know what the toxicology associated with tartrazine is.
Let's do it. We're going to a couple of biohacking events just to learn about what's going on. But hey, look, let's grab some bags of Doritos and start rubbing it on our skin, see what happens.
The problem with that is they were using just the tartrazine. They weren't rubbing the full Doritos on them. So I'm not sure it'll work the same, but
there's only one way to find out.
Yeah. Well, and the other crazy science news that I picked up was this company, Galley, raised $33 million. And I've heard of them before, but what they do is they grow cotton in the lab. So if you can imagine growing cotton without having to go and create these fields of cotton plants. And as beautiful as cotton is, I think cotton is one of the most water intensive and pesticide intensive crops in the world. So being able to scale up production and maybe drive down the cost of lab-based cotton is super compelling. I want to see how Galley does with this because I'm super interested in it.
Yeah, that would be incredible. More plants that we could manufacture in smaller spaces. I think that sounds like a win. So it would be great to see how they do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then also in the, I guess, less crazy biology news, I pointed this out to you, Erum. This company, Cellular, developed an app for the Apple Vision Pro. And the Apple Vision Pro is Apple's spatial computing platform. It allows you to see objects or animation in 3D. And this thing just blew my mind because it allows you to go into a cell, kind of peel away the walls, look at what's going on the inside. I actually didn't see that it showed cellular activity, which is like another level of complexity. I think it's static what a cell looks like, but I showed it to you and you were pretty amazed by it too.
I love visualization of things that are complex because then a lot of light bulbs go off. You're like, oh, in my imagination, it looked like this, but this is another way of looking at it, or this is a bit more clear. now you start putting pieces together when you can see it. So there's data visualization is a separate thing when it comes to insights from more complex experiments. But just to see a model of a cell. And I think this is a great stepping stone into what you're talking about, the cellular activity. What can we see, or I guess in this sense, simulate, which is my $1 million word, that we can simulate and then be able to have a better understanding of how all cellular activity interacts with one another and what's the cause and effect of certain types of molecules interacting with different molecules. So I think it's wonderful when you shared it because you're like, I want to see your reaction when you open this link. And I was like, okay. And I saw it and I had really high expectations. And that's because we talk about the model of a cell so much. And this was great. I mean, I do not want to discount it, but when you and I talk about cells and how to model a cell, we are thinking of something very animated, a lot of things moving around and what that looks like. Drew Barry is an incredible data designer or graphic designer that has done just marvelous, I want to say again, simulations of what cellular activity looks like. But I thought I'll just say one tiny criticism of this cell walk is that it's on the Apple Vision Pro, but it is on a screen in the Apple Vision Pro. So when you put on the Apple Vision Pro, you're pretty much looking at a computer screen in the spatial computing realm. So it's not like you're diving into the cell like the Magic School Bus dived into the human body, which there was the older version and now there's a newer Magic School Bus, just to let people know. But when we get to a point where we can have the perspective of a carbon atom going into DNA and then jumping to a perspective of DNA being transcribed by RNA, getting that perspective, I think is going to be so profound for people to see that, because then it makes it more real versus maybe this is something that happens that's an other, like this is happening, this is just math, this is just some kind of intellectual exercise versus this is what's going on every picosecond of billions of things, trillions of things happening very quickly in our bodies are happening all the time. So yes, we will definitely just check the show notes, you guys. You will see the cell walk. It's still very, very, very incredible. I just think Karl and I have very high standards.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say. We need more ways to evangelize and show people what's going on in biology. So I think this is one really good way. So for me, I was immediately started thinking about, oh, well, how would you use this to make biology even more accessible? And I pitched you this idea for an ad where I was imagining a split screen like you often see on TikTok or Instagram. And a lot of times you see one screen doing something and the other screen doing something else. And so I imagined a screen that shows like a sprint. So a very quick race, sprinters doing 100 meters. I think it's over in less than 10 seconds. It happens so quickly. So if you can imagine one screen showing the race and the other screen showing what's going on at the cellular level, you go in through the ear, you see the brain, you go into a cell, you see these cells producing the endorphins, the neurotransmitters, the ATP, the energy molecule of life. And then you watch those all being spread through the body as these people are sprinting towards the finish line, and how heart rate going up and they're moving through the body even faster. And then the race is over and the person is hyperventilating to recover oxygen, reoxygenating their body, and seeing all that happen. I think, yes, it might not be super educational, but it is one of those ways to get people more interested in it. You could do the same thing with what are the materials that these people are wearing and what's the circularity of those materials? How do you demonstrate that? Again, at that cellular level. And making it more accessible. It's also like a very unique way, I think, for a company to show, hey, our people who are using our products, they're not only becoming fitter, but on a molecular level, this is what happens. I think all of this stuff just, again, demonstrates how complex, how complicated biology is. You mentioned picoseconds. I don't even think on that scale. I'm always thinking about how complicated biology is, that we don't have the models that are effective enough to show us what's going on. We don't have digital models of cells yet, but we're getting closer. And I think that this is the perfect segue into our interview, because as computational power and AI becomes stronger, we're going to see a lot more of these applications or this creativity that will show us what happens in the cell and what happens in biology, not just in the cell, but also on a whole organism level. With that, I think we should introduce our guest. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like you're saying, biology is complex and we need those computational models as well to help think through these things. And a company that's supporting a lot of healthcare and life sciences, a lot of tech bio and biotech is NVIDIA. So today we have Vega Shah of NVIDIA joining us to talk about what are they doing? They're the third largest company in terms of market capitalization, and they're all over the news. NVIDIA makes very advanced computer chips, and they help software companies lay the groundwork to create innovative technology. So let's let Vega Shah take it away.
All right, Dr. Vega Shah, welcome to the Grow Everything podcast. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm loving it already.
Thanks so much. Vega, we're super excited to have you on the podcast. Number one, because I feel like we know you really well. I've interacted with you for years on Twitter. Number two, we have a very good friend in Shelby Nusad of Compound VC, who was on the podcast very early on. And three, we're super excited because we haven't had anybody from a company like NVIDIA on. We'd love to hear about your role. You are the lead for healthcare and life sciences. What are you looking for? What kinds of technologies or solutions are you helping to bring to market, and why? Why is NVIDIA uniquely positioned to do that?
Yeah. Oh, a lot of good questions. I kind of want to answer by first explaining why is a chip maker in healthcare and life sciences? What's up with that? Because I get that question a lot. And there's a good story behind it. So for a long time, NVIDIA was well known for making GPUs. And if you are a gamer, you know that the GPUs are great for making the NPCs look really, really real. It makes their movements look real. Their lip sync is great. Their hair looks good. Pixar movies also use them. So always known for that aspect. But someone at the helm, a leather jacket wearing person, had this foresight that he was like, we're not a chip company. We're actually an accelerated compute company. That's truly what we do well. And with that in mind, they went out to build lots of verticals within the company that serve different segments that can benefit from accelerated compute. And I don't even have to tell you this, but biology is a very data intensive field. We collect lots of data. It's complex data. And then the same applies for healthcare, right? On the clinical side, just different types of data. And how great would it be if we could, one, accelerate compute, but also get insights using large language models, using all of that data that's been collected in like the last couple of decades. And as technologies get better, for example, as sequencing gets better, we just collect more information. We're just gathering more and more of it. So they built the healthcare and life sciences team within NVIDIA, and they went and hired people that are experts in that field. So we have a lot of PhD scientists that do research on large language models, a lot of people that are also from that world that evangelize it. I would be an example of that. And so my role is basically thinking about ways in which, one, life sciences, but also healthcare, how we can bring the products we have to that group. But also, I think we've started, so we used to do within NVIDIA, the healthcare life sciences built software, and they're all AI models that are designed to serve various segments. I would divide it into three broad categories. It's digital biology, digital health, and surgery. And digital biology is where we do drug discovery type work and also genomics. Digital health is where we provide LLMs that improve clinician-patient interactions. And then digital surgery is where we actually have a product called Holoscan that sits within medical instruments that can give real-time sort of image insights to doctors. So for example, if you have an MRI, a doctor can give voice commands and ask them to modify the MRI image and inspect it in different ways so you can get real-time insights and make decisions as you're doing the procedure. And it's a really wide scope, and we want to widen that scope even more because now we have all these generalized LLMs like Llama 3 that are designed for multi-purpose. Maybe we can use them for healthcare and for life sciences. My role actually is across the board on that. But even more importantly, like what I work on is our partnerships. So NVIDIA has this great concept that we're not the experts on the science. So we partner with companies that are doing that. And we're not the experts on the patients either. So we provide them the tools and we work really closely with them, but we don't actually create the software that goes direct to consumers. And I work with our partners that are cloud service providers. So we basically work with everybody. We're not competing. We work with AWS, we work with Azure, with Google Cloud, because a lot of our customers use LLMs via those cloud service providers. So a lot of my work is how do we message and position with cloud service providers or with partners.
That's incredible. And I appreciate the example you gave when it came to the surgery part of it. I mean, that's something that we don't really talk about a lot, but it is super important when it comes to at least healthcare and thinking of how to help individuals with complex diseases. But when it comes to complexity, there's a lot going on. Life sciences is complex, healthcare is complex, AI is complex. So you gave us a surgery example, but what are some more immediate ways that you're seeing today how AI is revolutionizing healthcare and life sciences? What are you seeing that's really exciting across those three very complex spaces?
Yeah, I want to give you two distinct examples. So let's talk about life sciences first. The main product that we're really excited about right now is BioNemo. BioNemo is our collection of LLMs that addresses drug discovery and mainly the initial portion of the R&D pipeline when you're looking for novel candidates. The way we address it is that BioNemo supports large language models. They're almost always open source and we GPU optimize them. So we take models that have already been built, for example, like AlphaFold, and we optimize it so it works in a compute efficient way on NVIDIA's GPUs. So you can obviously go to GitHub and set up the tech stack yourself, but we found that is actually the blocker for biotech companies. The effort and the know-how needed to set up that entire tech stack, if you want to use AlphaFold in a production system, is actually the heavy lift, especially startups. So we want to lower that barrier by giving people these models and making sure they get the right amount of compute, making sure they know how we benchmark them and how we tested them for accuracy. So we basically GPU optimize them, and we also make everything open source. Look, we've built AI models ourselves that we also publish on and make it open source. We have a solutions architecture team that literally helps with the setup of it. My best way of putting it is we help companies do it correctly because our expertise is the hardware and the software. And then we let them go off and do the research and predict the proteins and look for small molecules. So that's BioNemo. The other distinct example I want to give you is on the digital health side. We're really excited about that as well, in a very different way. So we work with a company called Hippocratic AI that's building agents that can interface with patients and give them critical information before procedures. So a great example is if you're about to get an operation done, you will need both advice and feedback in the beginning on what to eat and what not to do to prepare for your surgery. Now, often this is done by healthcare workers, and literally they have to call someone, and one, they have to find the time to call someone, and they have a very short amount of time to give critical information to the person. Not to mention, there's always things like language barriers or accents and interfacing that is difficult to navigate. So Hippocratic AI, the company that we're working with, is using our large language models to create this complex agent that can talk to people. It has more time. It can really spend time answering questions. It can understand different accents. I think not yet, but will eventually also speak different languages and basically prepare people. So it's filling a gap that really exists, but there's no person that can do it right now. Our work there is help them build that architecture because they're using multiple LLMs like audio to face. They're using a couple of translating models that translate language. So I see the impact in two different directions in that in life sciences is where very much accelerate compute for drug discovery and finding new candidates and moving drugs faster. And then on the clinical side, how do we improve patient outcomes by just getting them more information and attention?
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
I'm super curious. I mean, I'm thinking about in the life sciences, in genomics, we don't have digital models of cells at this point. Maybe you might be able to have a model of even a mitochondria, but I even think like really basic life hasn't been modeled yet. And I have so many questions in terms of what you guys are thinking about from a data point of view, because life sciences is probably one of the top three most data intensive fields. I know finance is another one, and healthcare is the third one. How do you think about that tsunami of data being generated and how your language models are able to deal with that? And how do they improve over time? I'm sorry, it's like three questions in one.
That's a good question. So for genomics, we do have a product called Parabricks, which does exactly what you just said. It does pre-processing of NGS data and effectively helps GPU accelerate it. So if you are using a GPU to do that processing, it will do it much faster than a CPU. Speed is an element of why pre-processing is difficult. Speed and compute necessary. So that's what we're addressing. Again, I'll go back to this many times. We're the accelerated compute company. We don't have an army of genomicists thinking about the model. So we do assist that process in some ways. But then we also have researchers that interact in the genomics world to do collaborative research. It's not something we're not thinking about, but we also don't think of that as like our strong suit. And I agree, as a scientist from my previous life, there aren't good ways to model a whole cell. I think the problem is multi-layered. We have a lot of data, but what we've collected is sometimes unusable because it's not in a standard format or it's missing information. But then there's also just a lot we don't fully know. We are still adding to the body of knowledge as we go, and it's a complex problem.
You talked about GPUs, you're talking about microchips and devices. Have you worked with companies like Illumina? You're talking about accelerating compute. So, what about miniaturization and cost? You said speed. I'm trying to understand, can I take my phone and be able to sample some water and be able to do a whole analysis? I mean, is that where we want to get to in like NVIDIA's vision?
Not our vision, because we're always the person in the background helping the vision, but we do work with sequencing instrument providers, several of them. And again, Parabricks is probably the most popular product there. It could lend to the application that you just talked about, where you do pre-processing faster for NGS data. But we entirely rely on them to tell us what the vision is. We don't try to shape the vision of a genomics company because they're the experts on that.
So here on Grow Everything, we talk about sometimes life sciences. I mean, biology is everything. We say from our friend Kristen Ellis of Lower Carbon Capital when she came on, and I always say this everywhere we go. I'm sure Carl's tired of me saying it. But what she said is that the Venn diagram between climate and biology is a circle. It's the same thing. And we're biology, biology is everywhere. And you're talking about life sciences here. Have you encountered any companies that are looking at climate biotech, any other solutions? I know you're specifically looking at healthcare and life sciences, but just in terms of NVIDIA, how have they supported the vision of sustainability and regenerative companies?
Yeah. Good question. So the breadth of the entire company's product also goes into material sciences, predictive modeling. And material sciences is one of the fields that's working heavily in climate change. They're basically working on carbon capture technologies, materials that can make it more efficient or speed up carbon capture. They wouldn't come to us. We're not that department, but we do get companies that want to work with us on that problem. And then NVIDIA has supported weather predictive modeling, which can be expanded out to global climate change tracking, is the best way to put it. Every time we show up, it's always like, here's our hardware and here's our software. How will you use it? And we will imagine with you how you want to use it. So we often rely on people that are obsessed about these problems to come to us and tell us, here's what we need. Can you build it? So yeah, there's carbon capture companies, definitely some that NVIDIA has talked to. At the Santa Clara headquarters, we have a demo room where we show all the technologies that we've supported. And we do have a weather predictive modeling demo over there, which is really impressive because it can predict what the day will be like and show you the pressure patterns for the next several weeks and things like that. Yeah.
That's amazing. And what it makes me think of is I saw yesterday an Autodesk video where they talk about really being able to be much more comprehensive when it comes to any kind of construction in terms of the impact that construction has from a carbon point of view, which I'd never heard them talk about before. And I wouldn't be surprised if all that is just running on NVIDIA hardware.
I hope so.
So you're also part of the Inventors team, and we're curious about what that role looks like and what trends are you seeing in tech bio and or biotech startups? How do you support them? What are you most excited about?
Yeah. Oh, that portion is a small part of my role, but also one that's very dear to me because I've been a VC advisor before. I love the biotech community and I'm constantly trying to learn about new startups. So I really enjoy that work. I'll talk about a few of the companies that publicly have received investment from NVIDIA. One really popular example is Recursion. They were together on the stage at JP Morgan last year and announced to the world that we're investing in Recursion. They also use our BioNemo platform for some of their predictive modeling, and they use their own custom AI model called Phenom Beta on BioNemo. The other company I will mention, this is more recent, is Terray Therapeutics. We've invested in them and they're doing small molecule discovery. So one, we look at a wide range of companies for investment. The commonalities tend to be like they're using AI for discovery, and often they have a combination of platform and validating it in lab as well, because that's where the power is. So Terray, for example, is doing something called reverse engineering of small molecules using their own AI model where you can describe the parameters you want for a small molecule and then it will generate that for you, which is incredibly powerful because in the past, what we did is search for the needle in the haystack. We would look at large databases of small molecules searching for certain parameters. Now we can go the other way and actually just create them. Very impressive work. They just published a paper. It's a preprint, and they talk about this reverse engineering technology that they've created. So, yeah, I think we're looking at a lot of companies that are doing that style of drug discovery.
That's super interesting because we just started working with a company that's doing something very similar, de novo small molecule generation. Is that similar to what Terray's doing?
They might disagree with me, but I think they call it reverse engineering. That's the use. So, yeah, I don't.
Yeah, that makes sense because you're looking for specific binding affinity, specific solubility. There's so many parameters. You know what you need in order to design it. I mean, that's brilliant messaging. Congratulations to them. We'll give it the messaging lab stamp of approval. But that's incredible. So that is one word that I think when it comes to generative AI, and people say it a lot. I mean, I'm sure the term, again, I'm bringing this back to messaging lab, this term that's used a lot. But ultimately, a lot of this is simulating. Would you agree with that? Do you have differences between the terms generative AI and simulation? Well, what do you think about that?
That's a good question. Yeah. And I think I've heard three different terms: prediction, simulation, and generation. It's hard to place them. I really rely on the model builders to tell me. And Terray definitely calls it a generative AI platform. But honestly, it's hard to tell you because I don't think the early models of AlphaFold would not have been called generative. They were more predictive. That's the answer for me. I think it's like a fuzzy nomenclature.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it in terms of when you start saying simulate versus generative, it does start to get complicated very quick if you don't know what people are talking about.
I think it also goes back to that this field is so new that we don't have words to describe a lot of it, when we don't have standard bodies either. We don't have a consortium that's nonprofit that's setting the standards for how to use generative AI, especially for things like drug discovery. I mean, the FDA is attempting to do that by setting up a committee, but we're early days. And so I think a lot of these things will have to be defined. Otherwise, you just have to rely on the company or the model makers describing it.
Yeah, and it's not just the newness of AI, it's also our understanding of what its capabilities are continues to evolve. And then at the same time, we barely understand the complexity of biology. I had said we don't have a digital model of a cell. And to me, what's fascinating about that is we don't even know how many processes are going on in a cell at any given time. And there are so many of them. So I keep thinking that's going to impact the way we think about things like a GPU, because to be able to create those kinds of models, which we're going to want, and we're just talking about single cells, we also want to be able to model multicellular organisms and then also get to the point where we can model biome consortia. So all of those things are going to require different kinds of language models. And we don't have the definitions for those things yet.
Totally. Yeah. One of the things you said reminded me of the work that I did when I was in grad school, which was discovering new species of bacteria and then constructing de novo their genomes. You'd think the technical side was hard, doing the de novo assembly of a genome of a bacteria, but actually the hard part was convincing everybody that this is in fact a new species. Because you have to go look at the entire world's database and see if anyone had found it, do a bunch of alignment against large databases. And even then, it's like, yeah, we're 99% sure this is new, right? There's so many things we don't know about the living world, including microbiome. And that to me is very exciting because I think there's a lot of potential to find new enzymes, new drugs there. Yeah.
Oh my God, you are speaking my language. This is something that Carl and I have been talking about a lot with some other biologists and people that are in the industry of personal care and beauty, of food, and looking at, and again, we're talking about when we talk about grow everything, beyond just using E. coli, we discovered 1/1000th of the bacteria or microbes that exist on Earth. And we're living and breathing discovery and seeing what's out there, and just fascinating what types of functionality these microbes can imbue on a process. I don't know, I think it's a fish that excretes glass deep underwater because of the pressure.
Wow.
Just like, wait, what? That's crazy. What kind of biology? I mean, I'm sure pressure has a lot to do with it. It's just fascinating to see what's out there. And can we simulate, generate, predict which microbes are there and what they can do? And then how do we incorporate them into an application that could be helpful to us?
Totally, totally. Another cool thing that now I'm taking you on a total tangent, but
Please, we love tangents.
I read this late last night. I was reading this preprint that just came out where they found an entire novel protein superfamily in the gut microbiome called oblins. And we're just walking around with novel proteins inside us. That just blew my mind. I had to lay down and think about.
Yeah, I saw that on your Twitter feed and I had seen it somewhere else. And I was like, I got to go back and read that preprint because it's so crazy. What we know is so small compared to what we have to discover when it comes to the complexity of biology. So being able to just appreciate that and then to think about how we model it and this problem that you were saying where convincing people that you had a new species. Wait, you mean there's just not a database you could interrogate these genomes against?
Yeah.
Where is that?
Yeah.
Totally.
What do these novel proteins do? Any information on that? Any teaser?
I'm trying to remember. I read it very late last night, but I think they were found in these viroid entities within the gut microbiome. I have to go back and look.
It's funny because I'm looking at the preprint right now. These are an unrecognized class of viroid-like elements that they call obelis that they identified in the human gut metatranscriptome.
Okay.
So that's just the beginning of this thing. So it's pretty insane.
When I posted it, someone very matter-of-factly said, yeah, there's tons of undiscovered proteins inside the human gut microbiome. And we haven't cultured many of those species of bacteria. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. We've mentioned it on the podcast, and we've had one of the co-founders on, Cultivarium, a focused research organization based out of Boston. And one of the things that they were really working on was this ability to culture, I want to say gut microbiome populants or whatever, bacteria that live in the gut microbiome, because we still don't know how to do that. And we still haven't characterized all those microbes that are in there. And as important as they are, again, this is one of those modeling problems that we're going to have to get to, because how you eat, the way you live, all impacts the microbiome, and we all have a unique one. And then we've also had Stephanie Culler of Persephone, and she told us that there is this extinction event happening in the gut microbiome of infants where they're missing essential microbia because they're either not being delivered vaginally or because the mother doesn't have them. And so that is going to have huge health implications. So there's a lot there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I can tell you a bit about my history of working as a scientist. When I first finished my postdoc, so I did my postdoctoral at Joint Genome Institute. And then my first job out of postdoc was at a health and gut microbiome company called January AI. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were providing a service where customers would have their gut microbiome sequenced, but one of the goals was to track and monitor A1C impacts. So if you're like pre-diabetic. And so we would give them both an insulin monitor, even people that aren't diabetic, but are like pre-diabetic and then also track their gut microbiome. And I tested some of it as I was the scientist trying to figure out what happens. Well, there were so many interesting things that came out of it. Your relative diversity changes so much when you travel. One big one was going to Japan because you're consuming a lot of seaweed. There's an entire group of microbes that are basically recruited into your gut microbiome from eating seaweed. And so your gut microbiome changes so much when you travel to certain countries. And then my next job actually was high throughput isolation of microbes. This company called Isolate Bio, and they had microarrays that could isolate. And we tried gut microbiome. I think we had most success with soil and water, but we certainly tested gut microbiome a lot because that's a great application. And we were working with UC Davis on this project for milk. So mother's milk, how that is a source of microbes for infants. This is all in my past. This is before I wanted full software.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure it requires a lot of GPUs to model a lot of microbes in any type of biomes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, not just model, but image analysis uses a lot of GPUs. So coming back to NVIDIA, we do have a large language model tools that do image analysis specifically. So to fill in gaps in images, to do some level of prediction based on the images you already have.
But images of cells or microbes?
Yes, we have done cells.
Oh, interesting.
You should look up Monai. That's what it's called. And then I know we talked about Holoscan, which is a digital surgery one.
And are these models being used together? We just started working in this company, and it's enough to be dangerous, or I'm completely misunderstanding what BioNemo does. But in terms of the modeling, is that using SMILES data? So it's like the string? Okay.
So BioNemo is even broader where it supports multiple models. It's a framework for you to use your model on. You can use the model you created yourself or an open source model. And one way we facilitate is we GPU optimize the model and we give it in a container. And you can run that container anywhere you want. You can run it on AWS, you can run it on premise. We're calling it a NIM, which is NVIDIA Inference Microservice. So BioNemo is implemented using a NIM, and you could be using multiple models using BioNemo in conjunction. So you can be using many in tandem, including AlphaFold, or recently we put out 2 models that I want to talk about, DiffDoc, which predicts how proteins and ligands bind with each other, and MolMIM, which is actually also like inverse generation of small molecules using parameters. Yeah.
Wow. And so much of this stuff that we're talking about is complicated science topics. And in general, we talk to other scientists, but we're always thinking from the messaging lab point of view, and also with some of our clients, is how do we translate that stuff into things that are more user-friendly, depending on who the end user is? How do you think about that, Vega?
Yeah. So that is one of the challenges when NVIDIA went looking, like what should we build? One of the challenges was the absence of GUIs. So we do include that as well with BioNemo. And you guys can go try it out today. If you go to build.nvidia.com, you can try out our BioNemo models and you can put in your own molecular data file, or we have examples on there that you can test out. So the ability to have an interface we find is very important. We also work with companies that build their own interface as well, and they have more knowledge of what those scientists want. 310 AI is a good example where they've built a GUI that is very nice, very user-friendly, and it can do that predictive modeling as well.
I think it's worth it just for our audience, the people who don't know what a GUI is. It's a graphic user interface. So you do not have to look at lines of code when you're looking at your computer.
Exactly, yeah. And I come from the world of Dotmatics and Benchling, which are 2 well-known data ingestion platforms. And in my last jobs, like I was a product manager at Dotmatics for integration with the ELN and GraphPad Prism, which everyone loves GraphPad Prism for analytics. One of the main things was what user interface do we give scientists so that they can, one, easily and in very few clicks get to what they need to do. So it's surprising what causes a lot of delays in processing of data. It's a lot of copy pasting, it's a lot of clicking, and it's often because the UI isn't necessarily built by someone that ever worked in a lab. You think about why those software are like that, it's because a lot of UX is missing the context of what is the day-to-day of a scientist. So I had a lot of fun in that job because I could add that. It's like, yes, that won't work. It's too much clicking and I have gloves on. I can't do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about the workflows. What does that workflow look like? How do you set it up in a way that makes it easy for people? But I think, again, so much of this stuff is so new, and you have the scientists who are doing the work, but they don't necessarily know how to develop those GUIs that are going to make it easier for people to just move the parts around so that you can actually design this up front. So I think it's very exciting to see how that's going to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. My opinion, take it with a grain of salt. Different people will tell you different things. I don't think that biotech companies should try to build their own GUI or their own software internally. The analytical part or building a large language model, totally. But trying to build a GUI as a biotech company feels like you will do it poorly, it will scale poorly. And then the one person that does it, if they ever quit, it's going to not be.
Yeah, totally.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But at the same time, there's a lot of tech bio companies. And when we're talking about drug development, at least, a lot of them, they're like, oh, we're going to create a platform for big pharma to use. But then big pharma has 5 customers, or let's just say that. Maybe it's 20 customers. And then they have to charge a certain amount of money in order to be valuable because a lot of tech bio companies are venture backed. Unless they're just a bunch of smart people that are not venture backed. So they need to make millions of dollars in revenue in order to do that. So some of the companies that we've spoken with, they started out at tech bio. Then they're like, all right, we're just going to create assets and then sell them to big pharma and take it all the way because that's the proof point to be able to do that. But have you seen any tech bio companies that are platform based that are doing it right? Where, like you were saying, like a pharma company, they're not building it in-house. They're like, all right, we're going to work with this company.
Oh, good question. 2 thoughts. I completely agree. The platform play is really hard. The platform play minus an asset is really hard because the asset is where most of the investment and money is around, but also your platform, does it work or not? We're only going to know if there's assets coming out of it. So there's this inevitable pattern of you start building a platform, and often it's companies started by founders that are more tech people than biologists. And they come in, they're like, yeah, we'll build a platform. Of course, this is generalizable. We can build something, but it often tends to either go via partnerships to the asset play. Even Schrödinger, this very big platform company, which in my mind is actually like a small molecule, like Schrödinger is totally a success story, but they also have labs. They also do experimental work to validate some of the work they do. So yes, platform play is hard. I think the tech bio companies that I see that are doing it right, Recursion, again, I'm such a biased person to talk about it, but Recursion is hitting all the important points. High throughput data collection, large language models, and then also assets. And it's the trifecta of wins in my mind.
Yeah, they were just in the news yesterday because they're about to release data on one of their assets. But the initial assets that we're going to see data from Recursion are actually not assets that they develop using AI. They're either things they licensed or things that. So I think it's going to be interesting, and hopefully they'll be successful with those because we're all looking for the successful AI designed molecules that will have a big impact on treating some disease.
Yeah. Hopefully it's our client, Karl.
Well, we do have a client that's doing that in the molecular glue space. They're doing very well.
So this is something that's been on my mind for a while. Have there been IND filings of a computer-aided drug discovered? And this is something that I don't even know how to track this necessarily because it's not something we call out, but it'd be really interesting to see if an AI-based drug gets through IND filing.
I'm going to answer your question and I'm going to caveat it by saying I probably read the paper at the beginning of this year. There is a science paper that has tracked this. I read it very quickly. I think that there's a couple of things that are close to the finish line, but I don't think anything's in the clinic. I might be wrong, but let me find the paper and I'll send it to you, Vega, because I think it's super interesting. And I think it is something all of us should be tracking. I mean, what we do know is that we've seen some really nice investments in companies that are using AI, but there's been some really nice investment in that space. I'm super excited. I think we should all be tracking this.
The FDA is also, I think, in tandem working on creating better policies on how to grapple with AI-based technology, not just in the drug discovery, but throughout the R&D pipeline. How do people use AI for even planning clinical studies and things like that? So I think it'll get more refined how we think about the use of AI and taking drugs to market.
One of the areas we've done a lot of focus in this year has been on biomanufacturing. And There's so many aspects of drug development that are so complicated. I mean, everything from, yes, discovering drugs and safety profiles before you even put them in patients, but things on the clinical trial side, there's a huge amount of things that need to be optimized there. And that is starting to be added. And then also on the biomanufacturing side. So all of these places have the opportunity for people to apply these technologies and optimize them and change them.
Yeah. The company in silico, they have an AI designed drug that received FDA IND approval back in April. I don't know how many tests they've done before that. And I don't know if it's just pure AI, but they have worked with FDA. So they might be working on those frameworks that you were talking about, Vega. But I'll share this link in the show notes. And I think that's very exciting if they can accelerate the pace of drug development because they're so confident in our simulations of drugs.
Yeah.
I'm bringing it to the industry. Simulate.
Yeah.
NVIDIA, I'm so impressed with. I think a lot of people are going to listen to our episode because they're just so curious about NVIDIA. It's been all over the news. One of the highest market value companies in the world, Apple, Microsoft, and NVIDIA. Just crazy to see, I think, $80 billion in revenue, which is incredible. Who's the biggest client? Where are they getting the most money from right now? Is it from Apple and Microsoft? I mean, and then also who's the biggest healthcare and life sciences client?
Good question. We are a company that our technology only shows up with partners. It works when we partner with lots of companies. And as you know, healthcare and life sciences is like incredibly distributed. So I couldn't name one big customer. It would be many, many, many customers, especially the life sciences portion because it's more new. We want to work with everyone. What we want is to drive adoption. And we're thinking about the developers that work on this. We're not necessarily thinking about revenue. And it is within the company's ethos, devs before rev. So that is actually something that everyone says. We obsess about the end user. We obsess about the developers that are going to use these technologies, will make their life easier, and revenue will happen. And even in their hiring practices, even though I read this wild number, like 75% of NVIDIA employees are millionaires. I'm not one of them, by the way.
Not yet.
No, but they hire people that are obsessed about their field of choice. So if I go talk to someone in the robotics team, it'll be this person that's dedicated their whole freaking life to robotics. They're not even like looking at the stock every day or trying to see how much they're worth. They're just obsessed about the problem. And they truly hire people like that. So even though there's so many wealthy people that work at the company, when I go to the office, people are driving rundown cars, like their old Prius from 10 years ago. It's a very interesting place because everyone imagines NVIDIA employees, I'm sure some have, but people aren't going out buying yachts. They're still obsessed about the problems. And I really love that about NVIDIA.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. My first introduction to NVIDIA was, well, two things. One is my sons were all picking stocks a long time ago. And my one son was like, this is going to be a big company. My two youngest sons built computers. So the GPUs was a big gaming computers. Whatever they put in, that was going to be the biggest expense was the GPU. They spent a lot of time schooling me on why it had to be this NVIDIA GPU for the computers they were building.
Yeah, I think gamers are still part of the ecosystem and we still build great stuff for gamers. I like playing games, but I never built gaming stations. So it was never something that I thought about. I think for me, NVIDIA became a thing maybe 2 years ago. And I realized they were in like life sciences and I got really excited. It was like, oh my gosh, it wasn't even the stock. I think my dad 2 years ago texted me and he's like, you should probably buy NVIDIA stock. That was one line. It was like, maybe buy NVIDIA stock.
Great fatherly advice there.
There you go.
That's incredible. I was just going to say, we're touching on a topic that Karl and I had talked about, and I definitely foresee this happening in the future, is the gamification of biology. And we're talking about how do you simulate a cell? How do you create a game that can not only educate, but also help create a realistic model of a cell or just biology? I don't know if you've seen anything like that, or we could talk offline about how we could do this.
Totally. Well, this has already been a thing. Hackathons have done protein folding experiments, and protein folding has been a big gaming experiment for a while. 100% agree we should gamify biology. We're in truly the age of biology. for two reasons. It's the infinite problem. There's so many things to be solved. It can keep us occupied till our species gets extinct, right?
Yeah.
Right to our end, we can keep discovering things in biology. So if anyone's looking for an infinite problem, this is the right field. You'll never get bored. I also think we should gamify healthcare. We should gamify taking care of ourselves because we're already so addicted to all our devices. I hope AI agents and various LLMs are used to how to get better nutrition, how to sleep better, how to have work-life balance. I need that too.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's a great way to wrap up our conversation. I mean, it's been a complete joy speaking with you. When Karl mentioned that you're going to come on the pod, I was so excited because my first experience with NVIDIA, I watched the demo day that happened 2 years ago. And I saw that they were getting to life sciences. And I was like, Karl, this is huge that NVIDIA is getting into it. And I learned about the BioNemo platform a little bit there. And I was like, this is incredible. And then, of course, as everyone keeps hearing about NVIDIA, this big company, what's going on. So thanks so much for shedding light on what's happening at NVIDIA, all the amazing things you guys are supporting. You're supporting all the vision of these great companies that are helping us explore more when it comes to biology.
Thank you, Karl. Thank you, Erum. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad we talked about things I haven't thought about in 5 or 6 years. So it was great. I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really glad. Thank you so much.
We'll certainly have you back on for sure. Because I know you're a bit newer to NVIDIA. So whenever your 1 year anniversary and you're a little more comfortable with telling us some inside scoop.
we would have put out new stuff by then too. So yeah, definitely would love to talk about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Erum, what do you think of that episode?
It was incredible. I mean, it's great to be able to speak with her. I know you've been following Vega for quite some time and you've been mentioning some of her tweets. I love to talk to people that are very vocal about the sciences, about technology, sharing their perspective. So it was great to have a conversation with her about it. And it was great to learn more about NVIDIA. There's stuff that we read on the news. Some of it's some controversy. Some of it is a lot of heavy marketing. So you don't really get a lot of the details about what's actually going on behind the scenes. So through this conversation with Vega, I think it helped me, and hopefully our listeners learn more about how NVIDIA is supporting healthcare and life sciences. One of the things she says I really appreciated was how NVIDIA is helping their partners see through their vision. And there's a lot of big ideas when it comes to creating biotechnology. We're reaching for the ideas that are in science fiction or in our imagination, but we need the tools and infrastructure to help build those things. So when a company like NVIDIA that creates advanced computer chips and now also some libraries and other supporting software, when that happens, it really opens up opportunities to more people because some of those things are just so challenging to build on your own. I'm sure NVIDIA helps a lot of companies that had to figure this out on their own, help them save some money, help them make some more money. So great in terms of a commercial partner. And I really loved how she said devs before rev. She had all these little quips, which I think are always helpful. It helps build their culture. They put developers first before revenue, and revenue comes after that. But what about you? What are some of your initial thoughts about the interview?
I mean, Vega is so smart, and NVIDIA is super lucky to have her. When I see her on Twitter, I'm always really amazed at the kinds of information that she's helping put forth about tech bio. And she has that really, really interesting background coming to NVIDIA as a PhD in the life sciences, but then having worked at Benchling and Dotmatics and working in genomics for as long as she had. I think it was very insightful to hear what NVIDIA is doing. I think people don't understand how much imagination gets unleashed when you have these tools. I think the tools can be very complicated to use, but there's a lot of people who are working at that command line structure that are making these things easier for people to understand and use. I knew NVIDIA from the gaming space long before I knew of them in biotech because my sons were building computers at home for gaming. And so it was very important for them to have gaming chips. And the gaming chips were always going to be NVIDIA chips. So just seeing that kind of computational power applied to biology, which at the beginning of this episode, we talked about how complicated it is, that we still don't really have a complete model of a cell, I think is going to be profound in what it enables. We've talked to Ashton Trotman, who's developing a gaming company. I think it would be great to have him on here.
Mhm.
And we could have a whole episode about gaming biology, because I just think that it's, given that video games are the biggest entertainment in the world, they're bigger than movies, TV, and everything else. The need for incorporating biotech into those games, I think, is extremely important. And when people game, they become their best selves. People don't game enough, is my thesis. And we can game out the world, make the world a better place in a game, and hopefully apply some of those learnings. And it's the same thing with like gamifying healthcare and taking care of ourselves. All those things can be gamified, should be gamified. And I think people will live healthier lives if they're using these games to become healthier and to learn.
Vega put it very interestingly when she was saying biology is the infinite problem and there's just constant discovery happening. Things evolve, so something new to discover. So to be able to gamify biology is huge. So if there's anyone working on that, listeners, please let us know. We are very excited about that space. Maybe one day we'll tinker and make something ourselves and we'll use NVIDIA's gaming chips. Who knows? NVIDIA has a very interesting framework. They want to help these companies. They're creating some software to support some of these software companies, which is always very interesting because then it's like, does it get a little bit competitive? Vega mentioned a company that NVIDIA is working with called Hippocratic AI, which is a critical care assistant. And that really reminded me of my previous company that I started called SoundMind, which was essentially a care assistant for senior living. And it leveraged Amazon Alexa. So it was all a voice modality. And Vega mentioned that Hippocratic AI might have multiple modalities, not just text or vision-based, but also audio. But I thought that was very interesting because we worked with Amazon Alexa, we had to work with Amazon. And Amazon also similarly was an infrastructure partner, and they were helping companies like ours as well. So just making sure that they get into the market. Then it starts getting a little crazy and not crazy. Actually, I'm just going to stop right there because I don't also want to be critical, but I think a lot of companies get hesitant to work with big tech because big tech also has a lot of resources. And then when a company that is making, let's say, product A, in the case of, Amazon, in my case, they're making a hardware with some software, and then NVIDIA's making microchips with some software. Startups question, like, are they going to then become competitive? Because startups raise venture capital because ideas that they will scale up. So if there's money on the table and a bigger company has resources, it starts feeling competitive. And there could be a decision made with the drop of a hat that the big tech company will go after the same market as a smaller company. So that always becomes a bit of a challenge, something to look out for. And it's just part of the game of business. You have to go after certain markets. If you see value, chase after it. We live in a very capitalistic society, so that is the name of the game. But hopefully we become more collaborative. Everyone plays on their strengths and not everyone just assume that they know what they're doing and just go after it and mess it up for other people that needed the resources to do it versus... Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole, sharing a little bit of some past experiences, but I think overall, if big tech can provide more resources for those startups to grow themselves, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be exciting to follow Vega. She's in the show notes and follow her. We had a conversation with her after we interviewed her, and she does have an upcoming blog coming out. They're going to talk about more tools that NVIDIA's been working on to help with drug design. Some of our listeners work in the biopharma space, so it'll be very interesting to see what that is. There's a lot going on when it comes to the nuance of using AI tools, and we want to help illuminate what some of those differences are when it comes to growing things using biotechnology. But in terms of pointing you guys in the right directions and you guys do your own deep dives, we really want to make sure that Grow Everything is a podcast where we learn about what people are working on, not a super deep tech podcast, but if we need to go there, we can go there. But besides that, I think that's a wrap. We have some more exciting episodes coming online. And like you always like to say, is that we're growing this community as well as this podcast. And if you would like to become a part of our community, please sign up for our Patreon. We are very friendly with those people. There's multiple ways to get in touch with us. If you have any questions about what we talked about on this episode or any of the previous episodes, or if you have ideas or just want to get something off your mind, just reach out to us. We would love to talk to you. We would love to just hear from our audience and keep the conversation going.
That's the pod.
Yes, that's the pod. See you later.